Good evening, everyone. The representative of the Ministry of Unity and Civic Engagement, His Excellency Ambassador of the European Union to Rwanda, President of Ibuka, President of GIRG, President of Avega, members of GIRG, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to everybody. I was requested to be the following speaker, and during my introduction, they highlighted that I work as a senior legal advisor to the Prosecutor General of the Republic of Rwanda, mainly focusing on international crimes, among others, the crime of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. And I've been teaching international law at different universities, and I came back to the convention we're celebrating this evening on several occasions. My topic of discussion is probably one of the most difficult topics to be discussed, but I'll use the opportunity and the experiences shared by the previous speakers, and together with all of what we know, we'll make a summary of the experiences I intend to share, especially with young people in this room. They asked me to discuss about what young people should learn from the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and link it with the impact of the court to the justice for survivors. It won't be more of a story as the previous speakers made it, because of the facts that I want to deliver, because of the legal terms that I want to portray home the way they are, you allow me to use this style. Even though today, the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi is acknowledged by the international community and those outside of Rwanda, and the horror is known worldwide, we must still acknowledge that we were failed by the world at that time of this tragedy. The international community and the United Nations in particular could not muster the political will to confront the genocide, even though documentations show us that they knew what was taking place on the ground here in Rwanda. Acknowledgement of the suffering that genocide victims and survivors faced is key in our rebuilding process. And so the world must acknowledge its failure to prevent or slow down the genocide in 1994. We appreciate those who take this significant step to join us in different ways and who provided support of different kinds to make it this far. Rwanda's tragedy was the world's tragedy. We wish the world could have prevented the genocide that took the lives of over 1 million innocent Tutsi civilians. We are not talking about people from afar. They were our brothers, they were our sisters, and they were our parents, grandparents, and our own children. More importantly, they were the hope for our country and for the world. Yet, instead of carrying out their potential, they perished under the watch of the international community. Allow me to look back at 1994, when the international community knew very well that what it did was not nearly enough, not enough to save Rwandans from itself, not enough to honor the ideals and values upon which the United Nations was found and continues to exist. No one can deny that in our greatest hour of need, the world failed the people of Rwanda, and more specifically, the world failed the survivors of the 1994 genocide against Tutsi. Only in the face of justice, we can begin to honor the memory of the multitudes cut down with such cruelty. Seeking and providing justice, therefore, remains a task not only for Rwanda, but also for the international community at large. In many ways, post-genocide Rwanda became a laboratory for multiple justice experiments, both at national and international levels. Justice was necessary to acknowledge the mass atrocities that had been committed, to restore a sense of security within the country, and to establish rule of law after decades of impunity, which had greatly facilitated the extermination of more than 1 million Tutsis. Why justice? Justice was also necessary to restore the dignity to survivors and to honor the memories of the dead. And it remains the responsibility of the living to do that on behalf of the dead. This takes me to the events of 8 November 1994, when the United Nations Security Council, through its resolution 955, established the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. For what purpose? Follow me very well. For the sole purpose of prosecuting persons responsible for genocide and other serious violations of international humanitarian law committed on the territory of Rwanda, and Rwandan citizens responsible for the same genocide and other such violations committed in the territory of neighboring states between 1st January 1994 and 31st December 1994. Why am I mentioning this? Because I have the responsibility right now to enlighten young people. This mandate itself of the ICTR remains questionable because the scope and what we call the temporary jurisdiction of the court was in dispute with the wishes of the government and people of Rwanda. Because for the government of Rwanda, the wish was to acknowledge the events committed from 1st October 1990 until 31st December 1994, but the UN Security Council decided to only narrow this jurisdiction on the events covering the 1st January to 31st December 1994. And that obviously left some of the events and the crimes not recognized, and nobody was held responsible for them. 93 individuals, including high-ranking military and government officials, politicians, businessmen, as well as religious, militia, and media leaders, were indicted by the Office of the Prosecutor at the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. The United Nations Security Council and the international community in general sought to reassert the legitimacy of the international legal order. They had an obligation to uphold the principles embodied in the 1948 Genocide Convention that we celebrate its 73rd anniversary today. With regard to the prevention and punishment, the international community having failed in their duty to prevent these atrocities, the remaining option was that one of punishing the perpetrators. Now, what can young people and everybody in this audience learn from the legacies of the ICTR in particular, and the contributions that the ICTR have laid to justice for survivors is going to be summarized in what I mentioned right now. The ICTR has managed to establish an international precedent for international crimes, namely genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity, and the possible forms of criminal responsibility. The ICTR was known famously to be the first international criminal tribunal to interpret the definition of the crime of genocide, which is mentioned under Article 2 of the Convention of 1948 that we celebrate today. Through its first court decision, I'm talking about the case of Akayesu Jean-Paul, who was the burgomaster of Komintaba. On September 2nd, 1998, the trial chamber found Akayesu guilty of the crime of genocide, marking the first ever case to interpret this genocide convention, and for the first time in the history of the international community to recognize rape as a mean of commission of the crime of genocide. This is another historical event that I want everybody in the audience to retain from the work of the ICTR many years back. To the young people here present and those who follow these events virtually, the use of social media is possibly on the hands of everybody among us. And what do we need to consider in this perspective? The trial of Jean Bosco Barayagwiza, Ferdinand Nahimana, and Hassan Ngeze results in the first verdict by an international tribunal holding members of the media responsible for broadcasts to inflame the public to commit acts of genocide. If we don't pay enough attention, many of us, what we do, our daily interactions, our social media posts and statuses on different social media platforms might result into incitement, as it was the case for these guys that I have mentioned, under what is known as the media case. Another big fact was the definition of genocide beyond dispute. His Excellency Ambassador of the EU has mentioned it in laying a ground that the international community at least took a possible step to recognize that what happened in Rwanda was genocide. And not genocide as that, but genocide committed against the Tutsi. The ICTR Appeals Chamber for the first time takes judicial notice that a genocide against the Tutsi ethnic group took place in Rwanda in 1994. In so doing, the occurrence of the genocide is recognized as an established fact that is beyond reasonable doubt. I want to reassure you that the recognition of genocide in this regard is not a note coming from historians per se, but a judicial notice coming from a competent court which proven this beyond reasonable doubt. The fight that most of us are going through today, including the government of Rwanda, that one of the final stage of the genocide, as it was elaborated by Evan Stobb when he was laying down 10 stages to genocide, is the denial. The majority of young people here present might have excuses that you were not mature enough to give your contribution in the efforts to stop the genocide. But today, you are all mature and have whatever it takes to fight against its denial. In doing so, you need to learn, you need to be aware, and you need to be familiar with the legal judgments like these ones, to use them against genocidaires and those who orchestrate the battle to denial. The first ever international tribunal to deliver the verdicts in relation to genocide and the first to interpret the definition of this convention under its Article 2 was the ICTR, as I've mentioned. The act of indicting senior and high-ranking officials, including the former Prime Minister, Jacques Kambanda, was another historical record in the history of international community because it was the first time an international tribunal indicting and bringing to justice a former or current head of government. Defining and recognizing rape as a means of perpetrating genocide under the Akaye's case was another historical record that I want the majority of us here, and mainly the young people, to be aware of, so that you can use this in your interactions, be it on social media and other ways. Holding members of the media responsible for broadcasts intended to inflame the public to commit acts of genocide, as I have mentioned, under what is known as the media case, is another sharp weapon that we young people need to always use against those who deny the genocide and those who tend to bring the theories of double genocide. That has no place when we have historical facts like the ones that we have. To countries that are still denying the real operation of this genocide, we have a number of 2 countries that have resisted to call this genocide the way it is called. Those who are hiding in the umbrella of calling it the Rwandan genocide, that was proven by the court that the genocide was perpetrated against the Tutsi. Therefore, calling it the way it is is also complying with the international legal standards. ICTR also taught us that no one is above the law through the arrests of high-profile genocides, including the former Prime Minister, as I have mentioned, Jacques Kambanda. And last but not least, it continues to teach us that genocide has no time limit. Anytime one can be arrested and tried, that is strengthened by the most recent arrest of Felicien Kabuga, who is known as the business architecture of the genocide, last year, May 16th, where he was arrested in Paris. This shows us that no matter how long you can spend out running, time will come. Justice organs did not forget, we won't forget, and we can never forget. The adoption of the convention that we are celebrating today came in place to recall never again. After that, never again, it happened again and again. Dear young people, it remains your responsibility to uphold these principles, translate them from the books and put them in actions. I see the future ambassadors of different countries, but mainly Rwanda, to the United Nations. I see head of states, I see ministers of foreign affairs and different dignitaries. Please take this as your homework. Wherever you will be, wherever you are today, don't wait. Never again is today. Don't wait for tomorrow. Don't wait for someone else. It remains your responsibility. I thank you very much for the opportunity to stand on this stage, and wishing you a very good evening.